That's Debbie.
Does anybody know about the
June Elder and Bruce. Oh,
I think she made it. They're videotaping us, so I can't.
And that's one of Jerry. I bought that one.
You come across, that one of James. Take that out. I'm going to take that over to okay, well, UK. Somebody from Tennessee, they said. Billy Bob.
The oldest person, I guess, the oldest.
Why are you looking this
Cancel that.
Let's see, my earliest memory. Having come out of the Catholic Church, I was looking for a church, and a neighbor said, well, they've got this weird community that Jim Rouse helped start, and you'd probably like it because they sit around and play guitar music, and I don't know what else they do. So I came carrying Laureen in a bassinet, and she's 24, so it was just short of 24 years ago. I think she was about 3 months or 4 months old. But it was upstairs in the manor house, and I walked, and sure enough, there were a bunch of weird people singing and listening to meditation music, and it was wonderful. And I never left. That was my first quest, looking for another church.
Do you remember who was there, Jack?
No, I don't, but I know the first class I ever took was with Wes Yamaka, and he taught personal theology, and I said, this has got to be something where people believe the same way I do, and they don't criticize me for my beliefs. But it did take me 2 years to get my necktie off, I do have to admit that. And the memory, a lot of fond memories upstairs, but the one I still chuckle about from time to time is when we moved into this building. And there's so many memories building the building, but coming down, and I think it was Mark and I and Jerry and a few others were moving the piano downstairs, and we didn't want to take it down the front steps, so we decided to take it down the fire escape in the back. And we got it about halfway down, and the guts fell out. So we brought it down and put it all back together before anybody was watching and nailed it back together, and then proceeded to roll it down here, and they played it for a couple years and never knew the difference.
I came from a Presbyterian background in Pennsylvania that was pretty traditional. And so I was really enthralled with the Bible study they had, the very creative Bible study they had at 9 o'clock in the morning before the services. That's before we had our 9 o'clock service. Libby Baker and Jane Mason and Wally and Alice Howard, only she was Esther then. And we would use the scriptures, and we would each take the role of somebody and read that part. And then lots of times in the worship service, if we had something, a scripture that's like, you are the vine, I am the branches, the room would be decorated with vines and branches. So it was a very, very creative process, and it was kind of exciting, and I felt, oh, this is worship too? It was very freeing. The other impact is a person and a presence, not an event, and that's Jane Mason. She impacted my life probably more than anyone ever has. I do remember her putting on her own 60th birthday party and inviting everybody, and that was setting a precedent, because after that lots of people gave their own parties. But until then, everybody, would maybe hope somebody would give them a party. But Jane broke that mold, and she was good at breaking molds. And so Jane is a highlight of my life in this community.
Well, we actually moved from Kansas for this church. I mean, this was, we came out in June of '71, and we had written ahead, and John Levering invited us to Kittamukundy while we were here for a week looking for a house and for a pharmacy. And we met in the manor house. I remember it was on a Wednesday night, and I remember Olive was there. we sat around a table and had a dinner, and then everybody went off to their classes. And that was the pattern that they had at that time. And then we moved here in August of 71, that August. Another memory was Pentecost, when I remember Mark especially being on the council at that time, and we reversed the procedure of, we put $2,000 in the offering plate and let everyone take out anything they wanted. There were no records kept, and it was the parable of the talents. And then you were to use the money and see what happened. And there were a lot of wonderful stories coming out of that. I don't remember the year. It was downstairs. We had moved downstairs, and I don't remember the year.
Did you get the 2,000 back?
Much more than that. And people's stories around that would be their own.
I remember our first evening at Kittamakundi up in the manor house, and the reason I remember so much about that, not only was I kind of nervous because here we were coming when we didn't know anyone here, and yet we felt that God had led us to this community. But Sarah and I were talking tonight. I remember that Denton was at church that night for the first time, and I asked her how old he was, and she said he was born in 71. So that's how we remember that's when we moved here. And Denton was born that July, and we came the last week of August that year with our children. And so I do remember that night and seeing this little tiny baby, this little Indian baby. Of course, now he's all grown up. My other memory that I have to chuckle every time I think about is of Jeanette. Jeanette and Olive and Jane were such a gift to all of us, and I think I'm missing having women of that age in the community at this point. I'm fast getting to that age. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm 62. If Jane was having her 60th birthday, she was younger than that when I met her. But I remember that we had a prayer mission group. And we were trying to remember tonight what the name of, I think it was the communion, and I called it communion prayer. I called it, but I can't remember. Prayer and communion. And Jeanette was always such a riot. She told us in our mission group one day that she prayed in the morning standing on her head. And I've always loved that image of Jeanette doing a headstand and doing her prayers in the morning.
The main thing I remember about first coming, one of the main things I remember about first coming is classes. And one of my first classes was with John Levering and Jane Mason. And just one of the things was I was a teacher, and to get all these papers back with all these wonderful positive comments and no grade was so wonderful. That was kind of a good role model for me to do a little more of that. Another important memory was being in mission group with Libby Baker, which was the creativity mission group. And one of the things I remember, besides all the creative things we did, was there was always a struggle along about this time of year, in October, November, is this community going to exist? And she was a member and I was like a new person, but there was always this, who's going to recommit? And it was really very serious, because if there were enough people saying I might not recommit, are we really going to exist? So that was, I remember that a lot.
Well, there were like 11 members.
Yes, yes.
Well, I remember my very first Sunday at KC was over in the Manor House. And I think it must have been in 1969, because I was pregnant with my second child. And I remember going into this supposedly church, which was up in a ratty old kind of tumble-down building, and sitting around tables, not in a pew. And after the sermon, everybody stopped and had Danish pastry from the best bakery in town and coffee. and talked about what had happened during the sharing. I don't know whether it was the same day or a different day, but I remember that Mary Carrington was in charge of the record player. This is the first time I've been to anything like this in my whole life. And there was some problem with the music. And there was all this mumbling going on back by the record player. And I'm thinking to myself, whoa. It was a real experience. I didn't come back for quite a while. But eventually I did come back. It was just really a wonderful experience for me to realize that a worship experience could be such a real thing. I had come from a religious background where you came and you sat in your pews and you didn't talk to anybody and you ate your Wonder Bread and end of story. So.
I heard Jack whisper this, but I'll say it out loud because it was the beginning of something. It was Jack and Carol had the first potluck wedding at KC and didn't have clowns, but as that happened, I think there for a couple of years we had 2 or 3 weddings a year, and each was a little more different than the other, with potluck and clowns and all of that. And recently Mary Carrington and the tape recorder at Ruth and David's wedding, when they couldn't get the final tape to play and everybody sang the song that was printed in the bulletin instead of waiting for the tape. We've improvised a lot. And the other part was a Jeanette story. It was when Jeanette quit driving and then stopped going to mission group at night. She had a Bible study at her house on Thursday afternoons at noon, and I was working somewhere where I could take off at noon and go to Jeanette's, and there were just a few of us, so Jerry was there a lot of the time. It was a wonderful time to really get to know Jeanette in her later years, and she was always very important to me as a role model, different from the older women in my family, because she kept living. And just how she took care of herself and saying, I still need a group, but I need a group at noon, not at 7 o'clock at night.
Well, as the designated older person, yeah, right, is that what it is? Oh, thank you. That's pretty nice. Let's see, where do I begin? 1968, was with the Columbia Cooperative Ministry and got to know John and realized that he was very, should I say, a very deep person and yet very earthy. And he and I developed a friendship and invited me to attend this Thursday night church that they had in his home in Baltimore. And being a clergy person and having attended services every Sunday, it was so refreshing to have church on Thursday and to have my weekends free. And I don't know whether that calling was to integrate that group, but it was a group of 12, and we met every Thursday. And Dee Dee used to set the table with jelly beans and flowers and balloons, whatever was her whim of the day. And I remember specifically one night when we gathered at their place in Baltimore, and Sally came running downstairs and said that King was assassinated. And I think I realized a community there that I'd never realized before in the traditional church. Just a sense of being together in that moment of anguish, and knowing that the people you were with were so caught up in their common tragedy that you realize that there's a sense of belonging that I truly never felt before. And I think for me it was a sense of freedom to be in a group of people, with a group of people, not having to be the clergy person. And I could go on and tell you stories about Jane's crying jags, and we sitting around on the floor in John's house in Columbia this time, and always having a fresh box of Kleenex handy for her. And just the sense of community and caring and commitment that was so wonderful and deep. And then the awful news that somebody accused us of being the company church with Jim Rouse there, and said, how can we get in? And that opened the doors eventually to, we started meeting at King's Contrivance, and then at Oakland Manor, and now this wonderful place. So it was a journey that I would never, ever want to forget, and I'm grateful for God to have provided that journey for me. I'm sorry that a lot of people who were here then, there then, are not here, but their spirits certainly are. So, long live Kidamakundi.
Well, I moved to Columbia in August of '71, and I came from a Southern Baptist background, and I wanted a church. And my daughter Judy, looking in the flyer, said, oh, here's an interesting church. It's called Kidamakundi Community. So we decided that Sunday to find out where this place was. We found it at the Manor House, and we went up the stairs. That was very strange to me. And I was greeted at the door, can't remember his name. He was the administrator at the time. But he had a brand new guest book, and he asked me to sign it, which I did. Judy and I did. And at the door, in one room going up the stairs, stood a beautiful young lady, and her name was Sarah. And she had the nursery at that time, and all the children were in that room. And went on upstairs, and then a young man named Mark asked me to fill out a paper and list my. It was. I was 52. He was a young man then, and to list my gifts. And I thought, gifts? To me, gifts were money, and musical talent, that I could sing or play the piano. I couldn't do either one. So I didn't know what my gifts were. I never listed them. It took me 4, 5, 6, 8 years to find out that I did have some gifts. And I learned from this community. It was very strange. I used to come early so that I wouldn't have to run everybody wouldn't look at me. I would go over in the corner and sit down. And I wanted to get a chair because a lot of people sat on the floor. And I didn't much like the idea of sitting on the floor. I continued to come sort of sporadically because I wasn't involved that much in this beautiful building and all the work pictures that were down here. I guess my own life at that time was too busy to get that involved. But one special thing I remember after we moved to this building was thinking, I miss Sunday school. I need to be taught. And Charlie decided to teach us. So we had Sunday school upstairs in this cold, cold loft that had the hay and the owls and all kinds of weird things. And he usually brought a pot of coffee so we could warm our hands. And we climbed a ladder to get up here. And I think that's real faith. Anyway, and my first mission group was, my first class with those two wonderful women, Jane and Olive. And we did the book, Our Many Selves. And Marie Moore was in that class. And one night when it was almost over, I was just beginning, I didn't really feel safe. And because everything was so strange, everything was so weird. And everybody had ministerial backgrounds, and that kind of floored me. And so after the class was over, Jane and Olive said, Jan, wait just a little while. So I waited, and she said, tell us your story. And nobody had ever asked me to tell my story, and I had never felt safe in telling my story. But I told it that night. and they listened. And it was a wonderful beginning of healing for me in this community, and I love it.
I was thinking back to when we first came to the community, and I think it was that we had gone over to Oakland Manor I think it was a weekend for something called a black-white dialogue meeting, and that's where we met Bonnie Medlock. And Bonnie Medlock, through our acquaintance, explained to us about this church. And she would come over to visit us at our house. And one day, when I got home, she was already there, and she was lying on the lounge chair in the side yard. And I walked up to her and I said, "Oh, gee, Bonnie, I'm so sorry to have been late." And she said, "Oh, that's okay. I was just doing my disciplines." So she's lying in the lounge chair doing her prayers, and so she was explaining all of this about what her disciplines were as a member of Kittamakundi. And I said, "Gee, that sounds really interesting," or something. So anyway, it wasn't too much longer after that that Mark and I came over to Kittamakundi to try coming to church. And we just probably walked over at that time. And going upstairs in the manor house, I remember Neil and Normie Harris, among many others. But Normie was the person who was in charge of the speakers. And Normie had a great talent for getting all kinds of people to come and speak. And the way it worked was that you signed up to do the service, and Normie then would provide the speakers, but you did everything else. You had to arrange, what songs we sang and do the prayers and all of that sort of thing. So I was pretty impressed with them all taking turns at doing that. And then I remember at the end of the service, I guess, we sang Lord of the Dance, I think, or some song such as that. And the place got to shaking. I mean, the floor was very, had a lot of give to it. And we would start doing this sort of dancing, semi-dancing kind of singing to the Lord of the Dance. And the whole place got to moving. And so those are a couple of early memories that I have. That would be in '69. Mm-hmm.
I came from an Episcopal background with a Quaker college. And I felt the third part of my life was lived here in Kittamakundi, where a person determined his own or her own faith statement in trust and love, which was not exactly the way I felt the Episcopal Church was run. We came here to begin exploring a church for us. There were 13 Protestant churches, we were told, in Columbia at the time. We came here first, and we chose to stay. It was in a new city, Columbia, and a new church, Kittamakundi, that we felt comfortable in raising our interracial family. It was a place that I think could affirm each person uniquely, because we met each person and saw them as a unique gift from God. I can recall the time when Wes was working at the Eye, and he shared with me the idea that what we are is a gift from God, and what we do is our gift to God. And that helped to turn my perspective around in a way that was very life-giving. Appreciate that. The other person I think that helped me was during the marriage class, when Jane Mason could help the whole group see marriage in a way unusual for a woman who had gone through a divorce, that the gifts of marriage could be restored and the strength of marriage could be affirmed within a group and at a time when the marriage was under some stress from a sense of open marriage or non-marriage relationships. Those are two of the gifts I've received. Thank you.
I want to correct one thing right to begin with. We had a meeting this afternoon we were interviewing a woman for a new secretary for here. And I remember Jerry going down the list and he said, now we don't do missions. We don't send people out, to proselyte. But he's wrong. I was born a Greek Orthodox, became a Seventh-day Adventist, studied for the ministry as a Seventh-day Adventist, switched over to church music major, sang as tenor soloist in St. John's, Georgetown Episcopal Church, a very affluent church. I was there for 20 years. And our pastor was Jim Penhagen. And I was in a meeting with him, and he said, at this meeting, a whole bunch of us, he said, we're going to do mission work. He says, I want you all to pick a name of a church out of this hat. And I want you to go there for a month and bring back to us what you have learned about that church. Well, I picked out Church of the Savior. I went there a little late the first Sunday, and this preacher up there, he just couldn't speak. I mean, he had stuff in his mouth. Gordon Cosby. I could not understand Gordon Cosby. I couldn't understand him, so I said, I've got to go back. So the next week I went early. Well, to make the long story short, I got hooked. I took 3 classes with them, and then it was announced that they were going to give a class on clowning. And I said to myself, oh, this church is way out. They talk about a sacrilegious thing in church is clowning. How can it? But I said, being a Greek and open-minded, I'm going to go. Eloise and Glenn, there again, on the very first time I was hooked. I went to the 10 classes, and then Marge taught the class here. And I felt that I hadn't quite digested clowning in a liturgical sense, so I came here. And that's what hooked me here.
Well, I came from the Wild Lake Interfaith Center. Barclay Brown didn't know what to do with me, and so he sent me to Jane and Jeanette's Christian Growth class back in '71. And it was wonderful to be in a small group like that. I'm grateful to Barclay to this very day for sending me here. What had happened is he said his class overflowed, and he sent the overflow here, but I was the only one. So that was quite a message, One of the earliest memories I have, being a horticulturist, they always had flowers on the table, and they had picked the magnolia blossoms off the tree in front of the manor house. And every single table had a magnolia blossom on it. And I had never seen anybody pick them before. And I was like horrified on the one hand and delighted on the other, because I would never have picked a branch off of a tree. But it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. And that tree up there still makes me feel weepy. Just from good memories.
We came up from Fredericktown on 1976 on the invitation of these 2 people over here. And so, I should give the name.
Nan and Charlie.
Yeah. The pharmacist and his wife. And so, at any rate, I'll let Mary, the pharmacist and his wife, okay, she'll fill you in on the details there. And so we came down here just for a one-time visit because our church in Frederick had dissolved. And so at that time I was working with Family Life with the Frederick County Schools. And so they made an announcement here, something about they were going to have a class on Sexuality for Men. Is that about the name of it? And so I thought, well, this would kind of help my education for this work that I'm doing in Frederick. So I joined the class, and as I remember, we had the class downstairs, and I remember a young fellow. I was even young then, but there was a young fellow there, and then there was a guy that was, the fullback type, and they got in some discussion, and pretty soon I thought that young guy was going to really get it because this other guy really got going. And so I appreciated that because they were really letting out their feelings, and Jerry was kind of the one who stepped in between as referee and something else. There's another gentleman working with Jerry. I can't remember who the other person was. And so that's the first class I took, and this was quite new to me because I came from a Lutheran Baptized Presbyterian background, and we never had classes quite like that that I had knew about. The people probably felt that way. Then we also got involved with the high school kids through Carol Young, because our daughter was then in the high school age. This would be a little later on. And they came to Frederick, and the first thing they said, oh, this is like grandmother's house. And of course, we just have a house that's kind of old, but we didn't think it'd be in grandmother's house. And then the other thing they said, it's so different than Plastic City, which of course is Columbia. And so we enjoyed the kids. It'd be the Goethe daughters and the Anderson daughters, Anderson kids, I should say, and others that now their names aren't flipping right in. And so that was probably our first coming. And then I got on a worship task force with Mary Charles. Well, there was something about a feast, and so I remember still just heaping the tables. I don't know if they got much out of the service, but they certainly got a filled stomach. So we had this, and several weeks straight, we had different things on the tables, like you'd mentioned. I mean, just all over the table, and Lutherans don't do that. And so that was very interesting. And the reason I kept coming is when people ask me to this day, I said, they really come and hear me what I say now, but they come in their dirty clothes also. But that I don't mean, this way, but I mean, you're not all suited up and all dolled up. And so you really let your hearts and souls, parade around the table, because I'm sold on the table talk that goes on.
The first time I had ever heard of Kitty McCundy in our house church, our minister decided that maybe we needed to be good to see other congregations. And so we went different places, but no one would come to Kitty McCundy because we couldn't pronounce it, so we never came. But I went to Dayspring, held a retreat, and lo and behold, I met Olive and I met Nan. And they were from this place that we couldn't pronounce, Kitty McCundy. And got to know Nan a little bit that weekend. It wasn't a silent retreat. It was the only time I've ever been there. We talked quite a bit. It was just it was just different. And I remember she later invited us when you all had your, I guess your celebration. You opened up the house and had invited us to come. And at that time, B. Lazier's son was going to be baptized, and we couldn't come that Sunday. And then after our church dissolved, then it sort of rang a bell, and we decided to come and met them. But we have really had some grand memories here coming down the road.
Well, my first Sunday at Kittamuckundy Community was Easter 1977, which I believe was the first time the service was held in this room. And I remember walking in the door and feeling like something was very different here. I hadn't been in church. I was confirmed Episcopalian in high school and then had just kind of dropped out of church for about 10 years. But I really felt something was different, and I remember seeing Charlie, and I had been buying my tranquilizers from his pharmacy. I remember going in for a prescription one day, and he was very kind, and he asked me if I would like coffee while I waited to have the prescription filled. And I remember when I came and saw Charlie, I think I went up to him and I said, "I'm not surprised you're here." It just felt like this place and Charlie's kindness were all connected. And I too remember Olive very fondly. She used to, at Christmas, somebody would send her these wonderful pears and fruit in the mail, and every Christmas she would invite me over, and she would lovingly take out several of these pears wrapped in beautiful purple paper and tell me to take them home and enjoy them. One of the things in my life that I think made the biggest impact, and I still sort of marvel at it, when I decided to start my private practice in rehabilitation, and I didn't know how I was going to be able to afford to live while I did that, I came to the council and I asked them for a loan. And I remember Mark coming and asking me if I wasn't sure that I wasn't going to need more money than I had asked for. And I had never in my life really experienced somebody giving me what I asked for. And here's this man saying, "Are you sure you're not going to need more?" It was really quite overwhelming. It was just a whole new way of being related to. And it made a very big difference in my life.
Well, I'd like to say a word about the support that the community gave us in starting a new business. The community was so new itself, and as Ruth said, there was always this, are we going to have enough to re-up and go on for another year? It was iffy at that time, and our own circumstances were pretty iffy. We moved here and started our business from scratch, and it was a real financial struggle for a couple of years. And looking back, we didn't know we opened up in the middle of a recession. But people were so supportive of us, just in caring for us. A lot of people couldn't trade with us because they were part of the medical plan, but the emotional and spiritual support was still there. And I remember that we had to fill 99 prescriptions a day before we could break even, and so that was what we were working toward, was to be able to finally hit that day when we filled 99 prescriptions. And the day that we did, we were so thrilled, and we went out to the Eye of the Camel and told Wes and John that we'd finally had one day when we'd broken even. And Wes made a print with 99 on it, which I still have. But he just went in the back room and did that for us. And that's the kind of thing that we felt so much, and whatever we had chosen to do, the community was backing us. And of course that pattern has developed to be a major thing that goes on out here. But we were sort of the first for starting something brand new.
Jane, you said when you came here there was something mystical or something. Sally Osterling, I don't know how many of you know Sally, had been a friend of mine for years and years. And she was a Unitarian, and I suggested she come here, but she would never come here because this is not anything like Unitarian. So on the day I was to become a member, I invited her. And I said, "Come and be my support. You've been a friend for so long." I don't know if I can even tell you this. She came in that door. She said she felt the Holy Spirit, and she could never leave this place of the people.
Mine is a humorous door. The KC movers, at one time I had a back that could be used for moving. And so Lynn, our daughter, had become very much a friend of Jane over there, Jane Boyer at the time. And so at any rate, we volunteered to get there. And so we drove out and ended up over by the military base. Where was it? Jessup? And so we got there, and Lynn and I walked in, and she was moving. That's why we're there. She's moving. When you move, you take things from one house and move them to another. Jane is sitting on the Davenport crying. What do I do? And I thought, my God, what have we got here? And so, at any rate, not a thing was packed. Every picture was on the wall. Every piece of silver was in the drawers. And so I thought, what are we going to do? Then luckily, Barbara comes in, Miss Red Cross, disaster worker. And so, and Sam Nissen comes in shortly after, right in around the same time. And so finally, I said, Barbara, we came together and said, get her out of here and we'll pack it up. Because Sam and I said, we'll pack it up. You get her out of here. Because if she's here, we'll probably never get her out or the stuff out. And so that's how we really got to know Jane very well. And we do chuckle about this. She did get moved. Yep.
I remember the Barn Mission Group. I was not one of the original members of the Barn Mission Group, but when I got there, my heart and soul were in it. I remember sitting in this room every Wednesday night no air conditioning, no heat, no floor, no light, some hay, some birds, and sometimes candles because it would be dark. And we would sit here sort of right in this space trying to figure out how we were going to renovate this building. Sometimes we would be roasting because it was 160 in here. Sometimes we would be freezing because it was the middle of winter. But those were really special times with special friends that were powerful, creative times.
Two of the worship services that stand out for me. One was an Easter service when Jerry and Marge did clowning and brought out a wagon and a package in it, and I can't even describe it, but it was just a real gut-wrenching, heart-tugging moment that was very beautiful. I had been kind of so-so about clowning up until then, but that was a moment. Another time of worship that was incredible was when we had not come up here yet, but we came up for a Christmas Eve service, and there was hay. This upper part was unfinished, and they had hay, and there was a manger, and there was a loaf of bread, and there was the wine, and it was just very primitive. And my kids were all with me. My girls were here, and that was a moment too. There hasn't been a Christmas Eve like that since.
A couple stories. I remember the move you and I did, Lynn, of somebody I won't name, but we walked in and the place had not been packed. The dishes were still dirty on the table. No, it wasn't Jane. No, so it was just Lynn and I too. We didn't have anybody else, so we just grabbed a great big thing of garbage bags, and everything went in the garbage bags. And I don't know how we ever moved it, but we did. It's amazing that we ever got that person moved. And that was the second move that day. It was kind of like, oh, by the way, you forgot there's somebody else to move. That was a long day. But the other moving story was when we moved Carol Young. And I had this old 1955 pickup truck that I still have, and we got it all loaded, and we were going down the road, and like many trucks, this thing doesn't like to run sometimes, and it died. So Mark Anderson and I and a few others end up pushing this old truck with all this furniture hanging out into Carol Young's new apartment complex. And I don't know what those neighbors thought was moving in, but it was something else. And then after we got it moved in, she had been baking a turkey, so we were sitting outside having turkey, and the postal deliverer person decided to join us. He had never seen anything like this before or made some comments, so that was quite a move. The other thing I've been asked to talk about, because it's part of our tradition, is the crosses that we wear, some of us wear. And the crosses, there's a variety of different types originally. And it started with an inkling from Mark Anderson as part of the building, the barn mission group. Said to me one day, all this metal, we ought to do something with it. Why don't we throw it in a corner, Jack, and maybe you can make something out of it for us. So that's what we did. All the metal, we kept throwing it in the corner. And then I had an idea one day, maybe I could make a cross for our mission group. So I made the crosses like I wear out of the old horseshoe nails that we found in the floor, buried in the floor, this being a carriage house. And that caught on that we thought we'd make a different cross for each mission group. So we started designing different crosses, Jan and I, for different mission groups, and that got too complex as people kept changing groups. So I settled on a single cross that I've been making ever since. But all that scrap metal was left hanging around. So as part of the, I guess it was the benediction of this building, somebody asked, why don't you do something? So it was a very emotional, painful time in my life. I was then single, living in a barn or in a home with access to a barn. And I had stored all this stuff. I took all this metal with me everywhere I went. I just kind of dragged it along, box after box of this metal. So I started making the cross that hangs over the fireplace. And it took me about a year, each piece having to be filed and then brazed in place. And it was a healing time for me, that year of being very painful, emotional, but also a time of healing as I built that cross. And I remember Nan, when it got hung, saying, that is the ugliest cross I think I have ever seen. Crosses, well, you both did. Crosses aren't supposed to be ugly. And then another story of that, it's still there. Yeah, I was downstairs one day in my grungy clothes cleaning for some reason, and the door was open, and I was taking garbage out, and this couple came by all ecstatic about wanting to rent this place, and they came down, asked if they could see it, so I opened the door. They looked around and came back downstairs, and they said to me, "This is a very nice place, but that is the ugliest cross I have ever seen in my life. Who made it anyway?" And I said, "I did." Well, I don't know if they ever got married here, but I enjoyed that story.
The beautiful thing that I remember following on that comment, "that is the ugliest cross I ever saw," was Jerry said to me, "Well, what would you like to have up there?" And I said, "I would like to have a mandala in stained glass." And he said, "Do it." I have not done it, but that's the spirit around here. If you want something done, do it. And if you have a better idea, do it. I like that. That's beautiful. I laugh every once in a while remembering the Sunday we were still meeting downstairs around, and the floor was still the dirt floor. And at that time, I was making the bread for communion, and I had Jerry remembers what happened. And I got clear out here and remembered that I had not brought the bread with me. So I went racing home, grabbed a loaf of bread out of the freezer, and brought it in, put it, walked right through the service and put it down there. And here, poor Jerry, he says, and Jesus took the bread and broke it. And broke it. And broke it. And I said kind of quietly, "I just took it out of the freezer." And everybody collapsed. Of course, it was a wonderful moment, something never to forget.
The other day I was going through some things, I'm sorting things out, and I found a little button that said "Pygmy." Yeah. I can remember we were to clean the church, and each mission group, and I don't know, I was sitting at the table, and Dan says, "We got to do something about this. I know I'm going to make a button," and it was "Pygmy, prepare ye guards, mention yourself." And she did. I still had that, but that was some interesting times. We sort of thought we were crazy coming down on Saturday morning to come clean this building, but had some good times. We were. Oh yeah.
I remember being on a worship task force, and we were doing something with Paul, or Thomas, and so I said, "Well, I'll make a cross," and so I made a 4x4 cross, with about a 6 or 7 foot and then a 3 or 4 foot cross piece, and I tied it up in the back of the pickup truck. And so, of course, it's got the cross up here, and I'm going down the road, and I notice people keep looking at me because I've got this cross there. And so I thought, I don't know if I like that. So then we use it in the service and put it up here against the altar. And as a service, I don't, were you on that? I don't think so. But at any rate, then when I went back, when I took it back to Frederick, I put the other end down on the bed of the truck so I wouldn't get looked at on the way back.
The first thing I was thinking when Wes was talking, I remember Wes came to the airport and picked me up the first time I ever came to Columbia because I was to join the staff of the cooperative ministry, and I left telling Wes goodbye. It was the only time I'd ever see him, and eventually came back and got involved. And my first experience with Kittamukundy was on Sunday, July the 4th, 1970, and it's when the song "Everything is Beautiful, Everybody's Beautiful in Their Own Way," and Wes and I had talked about that, and he made that beautiful cover for that, which still hangs in my office. And I did the preaching that morning, and Sarah was talking about, I ended that with talking about my civil rights experience, and we all got up and danced to Zorba the Greek, and that's when the floor, I didn't know anything about it. I was naive. I didn't know they had a bad floor. John Levering told me afterwards, he was downstairs, he really thought it was going to go down because Zorba gets a good pattern going to it. That was my very first Sunday with Kittamukundy. And then I just want to put in a word for Marge, who isn't able to be here tonight. She's the one that really got involved in the community and stayed with the community while I was working with the cooperative ministry at that point. And I would come periodically, but she and our daughters were here right from the beginning. This was her home right from the very beginning. And some of the first struggles when you were talking about Normie Harrison began to look at how we're going to decide who's going to talk, and worship task groups, and that whole phenomena was really a part of Marge's involvement and gift and change that she brought to the community that I think she would say if she was here. One of the things I'd like to ask Wes and maybe Mark and Sarah, since you were here, are there other things about 69 or 70 that you recall?
Well, I don't know if this is really at the very beginning or not, but I know when I first started coming here, every Sunday, Wes had a new creation on the table. They were wonderful. They were wonderful. It was one of the reasons I think that I really came back to the community, was that these marvelous, they were really program covers, I guess, wonderful creations. And Wes, I thank you for that. They were great.
What do I have this for?
Whatever. We have a way of these things.
Whoa. Yeah, what did I say? Yeah. Well, it was. I did a Christmas card. I was sick in bed, and I was getting bored, and I decided I want to do something. And I think I did one silk screen many years ago in high school. So I bought a small set and made a Christmas card. And somebody said, well, we could use that in community. So that was the first card. And then they said, well, we could use another one next Sunday. and how about another one? So that became both, it was like every Saturday night when I was in ministry in a church, Saturday night was my preparation night for the sermon. Now it was Saturday night to do the covers for Kitamakandi. And so I got as much out of it as what you say you got out of it. And it really launched me off into a career, so to speak. It was a career that has been with me ever since. So in that sense, Kitamakandi launched me in ways that I never, ever realized. So that was a gift that the community gave to me, unbeknownst to me at the time. And I was just talking to Mark earlier that, maybe it's time to get back into that. And I need to ask for $2,000 to...
He may give you more.
No, it's not enough, not at all.
You're sure that's enough?
No. Well, I remember one time we had Easter service at King's Contrivance. And it was memorable because the guitar players were two young people who were Jewish. And they played the guitar and played Christian songs, and we sang, and we had balloons inflated, and we were going to go out in a circle and let them go straight up and see this wonderful celebration of the resurrection of Christ and all that. And so we go out there to the center in front of King's Contrivance, and it was the windiest day you ever have seen, and the wind was blowing like this. So I said, okay, now at the count of 3, after the prayer, we're going to let our balloons go. And they went up about 3 feet and went straight for the trees. And afterwards I thought, that's a wonderful parable of this community. And you can hear the popping of the balloons, and then you'd see one struggling through the branches and escape. And everybody would yell, yeah! And I thought, that's really the spirit of that group that was there. I don't know if it wasn't called Kitamakandi then, I don't think. But, that we tried many things. Some didn't happen. Some failed. Some popped. But some got through. And one of the things that came through was obviously this community. But I'll never forget that Easter service. It was unbelievable.
Who were the people that were here?
When? That time? Oh, gee. Well, Jim and Libby, Dee Dee and John, Normie and Neil, and Bonnie, and Jane. It was Rose and I. So there were, I think 12 of us. And I learned a lot about what community really means.
Do you know how the name Kitamakandi came to be adopted?
Besides being Kitamakandi?
Yeah, were you in the process of that?
I don't remember. All of a sudden we were Kitamakandi. And
I've never heard anybody say that.
well, the requirement then to be a member was to be able to spell it. That was That was a different. Yeah, right, right. Yeah, there was a. And you know, we really fought not to make it public. It was such a cozy, wonderful, nourishing group.
We still.
Yeah, we still fight.
We haven't really let go of that.
I see. Oh,
Still
yeah.
hard.
Oh, it's really, it's
I mean,
very
Southern
difficult.
Baptist that I am.
Yeah, it was really difficult.
How many years were you like that?
Well, not actually about a year or so. Yeah.
That's 70.
First public meeting was in January of '69.
Okay, so we were together about a year. Seemed like a long time. I mean, not because it was boring, but it was just so rich. And I guess King's Contrivance it was wonderful. We got fed there every Thursday night. The community met, the 12 and plus more, and then on Sunday we had service. And I was the record player before Mary.
Did you mumble a lot?
No, I didn't. I think they put me in a closet someplace. But that it was amazing thing. The other event that was important for this community was when they called together people who had similar kinds of communities elsewhere, like the community in England, and the one in in this country.
Church of the Savior?
No, Church of the Savior, and this other place. It was a Presbyterian group in what's the New England state? Vermont. Vermont. Thank you. And they had started this church. They wanted to build a church on a corner, and the Presbyterian church gave them money, and they began to read the Bible. And never did they see a place in the Bible that said you got to start a church on a corner. So they decided to meet in a TV shop in the back room, and they met there, and they talked about what the movement was and what God wanted them to do, and they read the Bible and said people in prisons were visited. So they decided to visit a prison, and they wondered if there was a prison in their city, and they discovered one, and they've been doing that. And I don't think to this day they've established a church, traditional church. I think they still meet in the back of this TV place, but they came, and it was a gathering of about 4 communities, and we shared for a couple days the gifts and the wonder of being small, also the various journeys that we were making, and that was another memorable moment, and that was, I think, just prior to our really coming to grips with exploding out and being part of the world. So many memories. I continue to miss John and Dee Dee, who, besides being spirit people of this community, were my spirit people. And whenever someone mentions the I, or Dee Dee's laughter and her beingness, it just makes me feel that they're still here. I still talk to Dee Dee, by the way, and I converse with her every once in a while. So they're wonderful spirits who have been here and who will never leave, and that's their gift to you all. And I haven't been here very often, but a lot of my roots are with you. So, hallelujah.
I wanted to say one thing about Dee Dee that was particularly notable to me, and that was that she didn't use the name Jesus because she had a real problem with Jesus. So she always referred to Jesus as George, and that made it sort of took the sting out of it for her, and made her relationship a whole lot easier to deal with. It kind of, I don't know. So for me, that was it was kind of fun to think that the dogma and the oughts were neutralized, and you didn't have to have a particular way to work with your Christianity or your religion. You could kind of personalize it, and how you worked with it yourself, and how you lived your life was more important than the words that you could say, or so. That I appreciated that in Dee Dee, and not only that, but that it was out in the open that way. It wasn't like this big heavy trip about you've got to believe this or that, in a certain kind of way. So I like that.
And her prayer in that room.
What was that?
She used to lean on that post.
Yeah.
And it's like a direct line to God's word.
Uh-huh.
And her prayers just
That's
came
right.
flowing out. And
Uh-huh.
I'd ask her afterwards, how did this happen? I mean,
Amazing.
Every
Yeah.
prayer was so deep and beautiful and human and hilarious. And she says, I don't know, every time I lean against that post, it comes. They still have that.
Yeah.
One thing about all this juice and joy that people were experiencing for the first time was that everything was sort of fruit basket upset all the time. Nothing was settled. So everything had to be worked through. And we worked through things all the time. There were always issues that everything had to be settled, and we had big discussions about everything. I remember a big discussion one Sunday because, of course, we had these Lottings rolls. I mean, we went first class. We had wonderful, expensive rolls around the table with coffee, and I remember a Sunday when they decided that we were going to serve hot dogs and beer, and I got into it with Sarah. You may not remember this because I said, I don't drink beer. Why should the community pay for beer when I'm not drinking beer? Let's have Cokes too. And she said, fine. But it all had to be worked through because somebody put out their idea of what it would be, and then somebody would have something else to add to and change it. And we'd go home every Sunday. By the time we got home, we were exhausted at noon. We'd been out it working so much through and worshiping and dancing and everything else. And we'd go home and we'd be talking and we'd say, well, so-and-so and so-and-so, so-and-so and so-and-so. And the kids would say, why do you keep going back out? And we'd say, I don't know. It's life. It's the most exciting thing we have going on. But there was an awful lot always to work through, and that was good feelings.
Well, of course, at the beginning, we didn't have any professional paid minister. We did it all. Until, when did you come here, Jerry?
I came at 70. I didn't start with community until 74.
And you were quarter time to begin with, is that right? And so until 74, we didn't have a paid professional working at the church at all. That's right.
And there was a lot of discussion about whether we wanted a paid professional.
We worked it too.
Again and again and again.
I remember the time Mark Anderson approached me, and you'll have to fill in the details because I don't remember all of it, but basically said, we're going to borrow some money so we can get the downstairs renovated to the point that we can move in. We were doing the work ourselves. And to do that, the bank is going to require, I think it was downstairs, it could have been upstairs, but the bank is going to require some security or collateral. So we want you and everyone else, if you're willing, to sign up part of your house and put it on the line. So I can remember, oh my God, they're serious. So I did it, and it's amazing. We signed the papers, and not only I, but everybody. But Mark, you were a real catalyst on that one for us, for me especially. How many?
Perhaps a dozen.
I remember that we had to borrow $100,000. I could not conceive of $100,000. It was so much money. So it really felt risky to put our houses up there and say, okay, we're going to go for it.
The name Kittamukundi in my research came from the place where the great Tyak, or the great bear, the leader of the Piscataway Indian tribe, was. So I think the Kittamukundi has that meaning. How it came to be on this community, I'm not certain.
Yeah. The other meaning is the gathering place. Is that what meaning?
Yeah.
The story I'm told of the origin of Kittamukundi is that the 5 people from Baltimore kept going to Church of the Savior to classes for several years. The Harrises, the Leverings, Rouses, and Jane. Finally, Gordon Cosby, the minister, said that he wanted them to stop being sheep and become shepherds and begin their own church, which was started in their house.
Well, I remember a short thing. Well, it wasn't actually a short thing. It was Normie would bring in the speakers each week, as has been said, and we kind of thought maybe we could do some of these ourselves. I remember the first Sunday that we worked through not having a, quote, professional speaker come in. But that was kind of the beginning then of our doing our own services and our own people beginning to do that. And it was important that we began speaking each week. Wasn't it almost always someone from the outside that?
Yeah, pretty much.
That was my recollection, and I remember the Sunday that we didn't do that. I got a phone call.
I always felt a little bit on the outside when we used to go upstairs. That first table was only for the people that were doing the worship and for the speaker, and no one else could sit there. And if you made the mistake of sitting there, you were asked to move someplace else. And I remember that. I always thought about that table. And it's interesting, we still have at 11 o'clock service a worship task force table sitting usually in front of the music box. So we've had that forever, I guess.
I remember one thing, and you can help me if this is incorrect, but when we were doing mission groups, let's see, we had one mission group, I think, for a long time, and then it got so large that we split it into 2, and we had A and B. Is that right? Mission group A and B. And that's how we met in mission groups. And then, was there a remnant group or something? So we had A and B, and then, I don't know, our outreach, we didn't really have strong outreach at that time. I think it was primarily in teaching the classes. We used to meet every Wednesday night for dinner together and do classes. Maybe our mission group was first, and then we did classes after that. And then Sunday was the worship service. But I can remember when we split into 2 mission groups, A and B. And I remember some of the people, there was, Dal Landrum was there, and I remember we had a couple of different people that took care of the children, and we had a lady whose name was Mrs. Jolly come and take care of the children's, and that was our first kind of care for the little ones, so that we didn't have them all in church. And she stayed around for quite a while. She was pretty good.
We searched things out, questions of our faith out so intensely at that time. We were all changing and growing so fast, and things were different from any of the background that we had come from. Sarah and I were both in, what do you call it? Sponsorship for membership with John Levering, and we would have lunch with him at Papillon. Do you remember Papillon in Ellicott City? What was the name of the big restaurant? Papillon was the smaller one, wasn't it?
No, it was the big one.
No, that was the big
The big one was Papillon? Well, we didn't have lunch there. We had lunch at the little, what's the small butterfly? What was that?
Pole Papillon or something like that.
Well, anyway, little butterfly. And I remember so much often being out there with Sarah and John, and we really put John through our paces.
We went to a lot of different restaurants.
Did we?
Big deal.
Yeah.
Jane and Olive made such a big impression on my life at that time. It's my first experiences with growing spiritually and personally. And one word that Jane used, which we don't use quite as often now, was non-judgmental. And she interrupted practically every meeting every time we were in a group. Are we being judgmental? Remember, we're supposed to be non-judgmental, and she would do that. And going back to the house and the loan that we were trying to raise the money for, I was a single mother that had just raised her children and finally got myself financially where I could pay my bills and all. And then here I'm putting my house up to hock like that. I thought, well, I'm losing my mind, but I'm not. But the main thing I want to remember is the wonderful way this community celebrates. We have the most beautiful, wonderful celebrations for those living and for those who have stopped living with us, and our birthdays, our weddings, any excuse we celebrate, and we do it beautifully and lovingly, and we really support each other, and I love that.
I just wanted to respond to two things. I think that when I said, when I first came in, that I really felt something special here, I became aware after a couple of months about the commitment that the people had made in putting their house on the line. And that was part of what I felt was special, that this was a group of people who really lived what they believed. And I had been in churches where I heard people say things, but they didn't really put themselves on the line. And so it was that commitment that has made this building really special. And Sarah said something earlier about the lack of dogmatism. I loved the recommitment retreats at New Windsor when we were very small 25 people. And I remember one year, one of my commitments was to read the whole Bible. And I remember Mark coming over and saying, Jane, do you really want to put that on there? And I didn't really, but I think that I was still, living in, this is an expectation. I should want to do this. And it was very refreshing to be able to take it off my list of commitments.
Does anybody remember when the mall opened? Was it fall of '71? Because we had, it's my memory that we had just gotten here, and we were in that room up there after one of the Wednesday night suppers, and Jeanette looked out the window and said, "Oh, look, we have a skyline in Columbia now." And we all went over to the window, and there were lights where the mall had just evidently was just being put up. So.
Speaking of Jeanette, I wanted to mention that I remember when we were meeting in Oakland Manor, and it carried with us here also, Jeanette's sort of dutiful role of taking all the cups home to wash them. Now this was at Oakland Manor, there was no washing dishwasher or anything like that. So after Sunday service, we had these trays that we had to load and put all the coffee cups and fill up the trays and take them home and wash them and then bring them back for the next Sunday. And all the tablecloths. Well, with Dee Dee just loved colors, bright colors. She would buy the napkins, and we would have the most glorious colors of napkins, and the tablecloths, and everything was so bright and everything. And so we had to take the tablecloths home and wash those, and the cups. And Jeanette was so faithful to making sure that the cups all got washed and back the next Sunday morning, until I think finally she got kind of tired of that, and she finally wanted to, she would announce, did anyone else feel called to wash the cups? Because she didn't want to really require anyone to do it who didn't really want to, but she was ready to have somebody else want to do that instead of her. So she really was putting in a plea for somebody else to feel called to take on the cup program here. But so I remember that she would go about doing the chores so faithfully without really much complaint at all, and that was lovely. I think how she did that.
I was just thinking that I'm one of those that came a little later. I'm not as old as some of you here. And so at any rate, I was at Camp Greentop from 59 to 68, and near the end of my tenure, my supervisor said, we're having a group of people coming up, and they want to meet with you and just talk with you a while about the program. This was an outdoor school program. And so this group came in and they sat down around the table, and they were in the process of planning a new community which would be between Washington and Baltimore, and I'd forgot about that till now. And they said that the kids would not walk to school over a street. They would all be able to walk so they would not hit a street. The middle school, they would have to cross streets, but then that might involve busing. And then, of course, the high school, they would be bused. And so they were wondering how we were dealing with community as far as just having the kids spend a week with their classroom teacher in the outdoors. So who the people were, I don't know, but I remember we met for part of a good morning with these people from, which was, I think they named it Columbia at the time, I'm not sure, but it was the Columbia group that came up to Greentop. And so it goes way back. And you did a lot of good footwork, you know, that laid the work for this kind of a community here, and of course the cooperative ministry and the whole bit.
The other thing some of you would be interested in, we have a list of every name that we can find that was associated with Kittamukundi. We have a list now of 350 names, and it has many of the names that you've been talking about, and we are going to publish that and make that available. And if you're interested, we have the present list. If some of you would like that, Bonnie Orison has been hard at work at that, and our first mailing will go out to all of them. I'm sure we'll get quite a few of them back since we don't have the updated addresses, but we're going to send it to everyone that we have. It's a fascinating list to go over. It brings back many memories for those of us who've been around here for a long time. I really want to express my thanks, too, for your being here.